KPIs in terms of your performance up through Q4. We'll be doing like a formal closeout after we kind of finalize these PY23 goals. And the other thing is I'll be looking for feedback from you all about how this kind of process changed, because this is the 5th time we've done this, believe it or not, and whether or not you like the state kind of issuing guidance at the local board level, because previously you've just been doing the grand regional level, right? Because I think while it might help in terms of like workload to put it on the state, we, the state, don't know exactly what's going on up there. For example, like, I didn't know there's a weather emergency coming. Right. So like, I don't know if there's a grid coming in or off, or what your staffing is looking like, all those things. So that was one of the benefits of that being the other way. So looking to hear feedback on if we like the way that this was done this year, or if we need to revert back, just feel free to pipe up as this year goes on about how that process worked. So just as a kind of like, I'll try to run through this really quickly because I know Barbara, you and Selena know KPIs rather well now. So our overall goal is to become the best public workforce system in the nation. We have this kind of 5 pillars that we owe. Everything presented here, even though it might say Southern Middle on it, it's a collaborative with the state. So if there's a situation where Southern Middle is not able to hit their goal, it would be our goal, right? So there could be some issues on the state side. I'll actually go into a couple of these. Talking about federal performance, there's the class 1 thing, and I think perhaps we might be talking about it too much in terms of we really have it locked down. We're kind of exceeding most of our goals, not greatly exceeding them. So we have a little bit of play there. Talking about the percentage-based issue, right? The classic example, if we have one LWA who finds 128 folks jobs, another LWA who finds 13 people jobs. But according to federal performance, the one that was able to find 13 jobs out of 15 possible would be considered to be the most successful. While when we presented this question to the state board, they were saying, wait, why don't we consider this first option to be more successful, because they're helping out more folks. So that's kind of the gap that KPIs were designed to address. And so what that looks like in terms of enrollments is historically, and this is before KPIs were put out there, we've had falling enrollments kind of across the board. Line advisor is one example there. And then as a result of KPIs, we've kind of been intentional about kind of changing our culture and kind of enrolling folks who come in to the American Job Centers, because we know most people want a job, right? And then better performance, the kind of terminology is a little bit confusing. We want to avoid that wherever possible. And then finally, we want to be clear about the cohorts that we're talking about, so we can be actionable about a KPI. So, for example, with the better performance, each kind of scorecard that might have one date name on the top of it, but really it's going to mean at least 5 overlapping cohorts, right? So we could have people back 2.5 years ago inside that data. And so this is important. So when you might be discussing with your local board about your better performance levels, it's important to keep in mind whom those numbers represent. So all of that being said, our commissioner has said we need to make sure that we're measuring the right thing, and hopefully KPIs can speak to them. So WIOA within the context of Tennessee, and moving into some feedback that we've received. Like I said, this is the kind of the fifth time, amazingly, that we've done this in terms of putting out targets. And so two big pieces of feedback to address here. The first is wherever possible, we want to move to wheel-wide measures rather than program specific. Basically, that's kind of to speak to that. We had 23 KPIs last year, which is a bit overwhelming. So trying to cut those down by looking at things that we're all contributing towards. And then secondly, wherever possible, shift to outcome-based measures. And so that basically means we want to measure how effective we are rather than just how busy we are. So that being said, we need to make sure that we are serving enough folks. I think CSEP is a good example of that. I know that Southern Middle doesn't have a state kind of based CSEP provider there. But that's an example where we need to make sure that we have enough people in the system before we focus on qualitative measures. But that is the ultimate view. So this is kind of ways that we're addressing those kind of two pieces of feedback. One, we're working on developing a series of, like we said, outcome-based cross-programmatic KPIs. So those would look like something like rapid P5 base goal, which would touch on those four tenets of WIOA. Increasing labor force participation. Notice that it doesn't say that the force participation rate. I think we've had a conversation about this multiple times now about talking about the percentage change at the labor force participation rate level. It's like about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So we need to make sure that we are looking at perhaps a count-based measure. That is something that we can actually implement because we want all KPIs to be fair, sustainable, and reasonable goals. And then the one that we're actually close enough to actually be at the pilot stage is securing living wage. So this kind of touches on kind of core pillars 2, 3, and 5. So going a little bit deeper into living wage. Living wage, as Tennessee is going to find, we're going to try to start off looking at the MIT living wage model, but we also have to square that round peg with the data set that we currently have available. And so just to go in a little bit deeper, the three kind of data points that MIT uses is geography, okay, where someone's from. It does it by county, right? So you can see in Southern Middle, there's a lot of different, the colors are just kind of the same living wage number, just based on the counties. So there's a lot of different changes there. And then secondly is the household size, right? Depending on how many people you have in your house, it depends on how big your house needs to be and all the additional costs associated with that. And then finally, what is your household makeup, right? So we know that 2 adults both working with 1 kid probably needs to be making very different salaries than a single parent with 2 kids, right? So if this kind of sounds fun, or if you think that there's someone on your team might find kind of diving deeper into this pilot measure about making decisions along the way about what should count, what shouldn't count, please just email me and we'd be happy to add you in to this kind of small group. Continuing on with constructive feedback, we reduced the number of KPIs from 23 to 13, which we're excited about. Kind of focusing. If we have 23, then it's really not particularly key, right? So we need to maintain that key part of key performance indicator. There are some asterisks here that I want to point out. The first is these have always been the case, but we're just kind of formalizing that. It's for a national disaffiliated worker, say you have a wildfire, or say that the weather event today is so severe that we need to apply for a federal grant for that. Like always, we will likely have strings attached that we tell the feds, right? Here's X amount of dollars to serve Y amount of folks. That would just, the Y amount of folks would just kind of be a KPI. And it would not have to be like inside the quarter system. It would just be exactly kind of what we tell the feds that we want to do. Same thing with the encumbered worker. And then there are two measures that I'm labeling on a poll, and those are from TANF, aka Comes First. And I'm not sure if those on the call are aware that TANF has kind of flipped their service delivery model. And so they used to be provider based. Now they're kind of pulling those services in-house and having state staff deliver those services, one. And then two is they're adopting a new case management system. And so there's a lot going on over there right now. And so basically they said, we're going to pull back on KPIs just temporarily until they get all that sorted out. So, but I would imagine and I would hope they would come back on the other side of that transition. And then when they do, note here the wage attainment number, they have said that they would be open to aligning with that living wage number that we come up with. I also have a note here that Northern Mill actually asked a change on this. And so while we were holding off on having incumbent workers as a KPI, because of the numbers swing so much, Northern Middle local board has requested that they set aside, I think it was $300,000, serve 150 participants. And so because of that, and they're using the money from Title I, we decided that we'd be okay with lowering the initially proposed adult KPI for them. So that being said, so basically what's going to happen there is we look at 150 as an annual goal, and we'll just look at quarterly progression towards that annual goal, reporting to the state board as if it was a normal KPI, maybe labeling as a local KPI. But in these conversations this week, we've had a number of LWDA say that makes sense to them too. What do you as Southern Middle think about that? Does your local board request that you're setting aside funds for economic worker, or is that something that seems appealing? What are your comments on that?
Normally, we don't set funding aside for incumbent worker because our funding has gotten so low. We just don't feel like we can do that. Now, of course, you know, if funding comes along like it did this past year that we could utilize for, we love it because we do have a lot of people or businesses that request it. We just feel like, you know, it takes all of our funding for, you know, training support services and that type of thing. So I don't know, it may be something we have to look at down the road, but at this point we have not been putting any aside.
And to be clear, like that's 100% at your discretion. And I think Upper Cumberland had similar comments to that. And so for that reason, maybe it makes sense to just kind of not have it be a state-based KPI, but like if say another Northern Middle and Greater Memphis 2050. Right, so it's increasing the autonomy of your local. I guess I should say maybe.
Right. Did anybody make a comment that incumbent worker doesn't count towards, you know, MPCR?
I know that has come. There's been many discussions about that over the years, and I've lost track of when we landed on it. Brian,
as I say, that's another, you know, that would be another comment of, you know, we can, as a board, you can keep up to 20% of your formula dollars to put towards that. And I know Northern Middle does. For us, I think if, you know, it would be better suited if you had it count towards the MPCR. But they're not, you know, they don't have to be WIOA eligible. So it's kind of, I agree with 100% of what Barbara said. But that's one of the reasons is it doesn't really count towards that MPCR rate.
Brian, can you remind us where we landed on?
Well, in terms of incumbent worker training, yes, it's not factored into MPCR, but it's also in the calculation reduced from the program denominator, so it doesn't have an impact on MPCR whether or not you do incumbent worker training or not. So it's not detrimental to not pursue income, or it isn't detrimental to pursue incumbent worker training. I think that's something that we want to reiterate. But in terms of the NPCR policy, it hasn't been modified or amended yet to change whether or not incumbent worker training can be included. I know that there have been ongoing discussions revolving around changing the NPCR policy, but I can't really confirm or commit to what may or may not occur since I haven't been privy to those conversations.
Thanks for that. And the Southern Middle, and I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you have an opinion on what direction you might want to go on that? And again, I'm just trying to, this conversation, because we've done most of this via email, right, is kind of really kind of discussion focused. And so looking forward to any kind of feedback that you might.
I don't know. I mean, are you talking about if it just comes out of formula funds? Is that correct? If you're using the 20% out of formula funds going toward your NPCR? Is that what you're saying, asking?
Yeah, it would be out of the formula funds. You can encumber 20% of your formula funds, spend on incumbent worker training, but when we actually do NPCR, we back out incumbent worker training from participant expenses, but we also back it out of overall expenses, so it doesn't have an impact. So there isn't a detriment to pursuing incumbent worker training. So that's something we just wanted to clarify, that if you do incumbent worker training, it's not going to have a negative impact on your NPCR directly.
Okay.
I can give you a Selena Moore opinion.
Sure.
Blake,
I think for us, I'm going to speak as a board. I'm going to put my board member hat on.
Sure.
I think it could change year to year because some years you see more participant demand, especially like EV coming down the pike and all these new, micro credentials. You're going to want to put more money in the hands of participants than maybe, upskilling. I think it could be a mix of both. I think it would really depend on what the trend is in your local area. Because for us right now, we've got, OJT contracts with Ultium that they're not using. But if we could, it's just sitting there and has been for the past 2 years. If you could somehow repurpose that state funding for, say, incumbent workers, then we could use it. So I really think it's whatever, what the trend at that time for that year you see happening in your local area.
So I'm kind of hearing we recognize this as a kind of the soft power tool to influence service delivery, right? And we want to be
Yes.
aware of the impact about including it, excluding it, or taking it out of from
Yes.
the. And I don't think that Justin is on here currently. I've again, part of it is things move around so quickly, it's hard to keep track. Justin is still leading the policy work group, is that correct? On these type of things.
Yes, to my knowledge, he's still leading it. That's where I've seen the emails come from.
Okay, cool. So if you would like again, we're taking notes here for this part, but if you'd like to echo that to Justin, I think that would be probably the best reason to do.
I think it would be worth the local areas, executive director, like just having a conversation of, because it's not going to be a one size fits all. Or even a whole, what works for one region may not work for another grand planning region. But I think it's, and Barbara, you can take away, add to, I think it's always worth a discussion around income and NPCR.
I agree.
I agree, because we've never done that out of the program funds since I've been executive director.
We've not ever, since I've been with the state, 18 years, we've never used that up to 20%.
Okay, because I was going to say I would have to really study it, discuss the impacts from it to have an opinion, either way, because we have not. But it seems like we barely have enough for everything else. So I think if we pulled for that, we would not meet KPIs because it takes a little bit of funding we have to meet KPIs.
But
so
we
I
do
would-
keep a list, like we do have a list of companies that are interested. So I mean, we see the demand that companies have for it, for upskilling.
Yes,
So
definitely. We do have a lot of requests for it by far. So when we got that funding this time, it helped because we had that list and we just started calling people that thought they could get it, scheduled in time. So anytime you have funding, that is a good place to put that is IWT and OJT.
So the demand is there.
Yes.
The other kind of missing piece here is that if you notice that the majority of KPIs are participant focused, right? And not business leaning. I think part of that is because I've been the kind of the person instigating the conversation as it relates to KPIs, and I honestly don't kind of understand the business world, so I wouldn't want to lead them on that. But I do think like now that we have a director, Sharon Pelch, over business services, perhaps we can pursue making sure that the businesses are included with the these measures, because what I don't want to do is, should you, and again, this might not make sense specifically to Southern Middle, but should an LWA in general want to pursue, dedicating 20% as is allowable, we want to make sure that we can report out in some way, somehow, to the state board, hey, we might be lowering on this KPI because the emphasis is over here, right?
And I think you could add to that, Ben, in the state plan and in all of our local and regional plans, we keep saying as an agency, we, businesses drive what we do. That's the driver of the initiatives. So if we're saying that, are we putting our money where our mouth is? And I would honestly say probably not if we're not really focusing on businesses and more participant-based KPIs. I see that shifting because, the business consultant role has been brought up, to the RDs so many times, and how, we're shifting our initiatives and sector strategies. I feel like that's where we're going with this roadmap of KPIs.
Right. And I will say the only KPI that I think that directly addresses businesses is back to this living wage. And the reason that I would say that it addresses businesses is it really is using salary as an indicator on what businesses value is important. And so we are getting, yes, participants that wage, but also working with employers that are willing to pay that wage, right? Then I would say that we are aligning with that business community. And so, yeah, so thank you for that discussion on the kind of overall role of things. Another piece of feedback, oh, look, it was right there, of introducing living wages, back to that, talking about wide measures and how that goes. So not only how many people did we serve, but what they served. And again, I just wanted to emphasize there that just because it's the first one, living wage, doesn't, for kind of cross-programmatic things, doesn't mean it's the only thing. We're working on this other one. Because we know that there's some programs that's not the kind of the emphasis, right? I think like AE, CSEP are good examples where it's really kind of training or people entering into the labor force might be the emphasis of those programs. And so we want to make sure that we get those other metrics online as soon as possible. The third piece of feedback was, hey, state, could you please pursue opportunities for additional funding, particularly as it relates to the core programs as we see our fundings drop off. And hopefully the Summer Youth Work Experience Program is a good example of that. Another example, which is a little bit different, is if you all have the capacity to pursue kind of grant opportunities on your own. I know that Marla basically wrote Fort Campbell grant and basically got Tennessee to put our letterhead on that. And so definitely we're open to those opportunities as well. And then another point was, hey, we need to negotiate KPI sooner. Notice that it was August and the program gets started in July 1st, right? So we want to make sure that wherever possible, we get these to you before the start of the program year. And honestly, it would be great to give you even a couple of extra months ahead of time so you can put that in your contract with your providers. So one of the ways we're trying to narrow that gap is, if you notice in that initial email, I sent this about maybe a month ago now, along with not only the state's guidance for program year 23, but also a forecasted goal for 24. And so basically, hopefully this will be helpful that should we be in the same situation that we were in this year, and honestly the last 2 years as well, we were short of hitting that July 1st deadline about having the target set. So hopefully these forecasted targets will be helpful to say like how aggressive the state wants to be as it relates to these programs. And so if you don't hear from us by July 1st of 2024, you could default back to this. That being said, of course, we will tweak them slightly because we'll have 12 more months in the but hopefully this is another tool that could be helpful. Moving into local board specific feedback as it relates to this current process of PY23. We had kind of three big points of feedback. One is incumbent worker, which we just went through. The other two are, one was talking about carrying capacity. I think all local areas kind of said this in different ways. I just kind of quoted Southeast here to say increasing enrollment targets while decreasing funding year over year compromises service delivery volume. And so I'll dive into that one a little bit deeper in a second. And then the third one is, hey, can we just have the KPI points of contact? And we're when I send this out, meeting email following these, I'll definitely be sure to include the contacts for each one. So this is kind of looking like where we're at in terms of the timeline on this. And again, we need to make sure that we negotiate by July 1st. So we have kind of figured out how big the pie is already, and now we're just trying to figure out how to slice that pie. And we're really kind of mainly done with figuring out how to slice the pie. I noticed that we had kind of three different points to talk about as it relates to Southern Metals KPIs. Looking first on adult dislocated worker, note that again we kind of took off incumbent worker from this, but this is kind of our historical where we're at as it relates to these goals. And then this is what it looks like specifically for Southern Middle. So basically I went ahead and I put in the state's recommendation here at 58, 59, 59, 59. And so basically that looks like it's in the wheelhouse of achievable. That being said, so this is my kind of cheat sheet, which I'll keep coming back to. I know there's a lot of colors and wacky things going on here, so just to go through that really quickly. These numbers here that are green, like we both agreed to. The numbers in blue, for example, for this one that we're talking about now, adult dislocated worker, we in the state had initially asked for 261 for Southern Middle. You all initially proposed 224, and what we're proposing now is to go in between at 235. And then the quarterly breakouts are just making sure that they kind of add up to the number that you all proposed. And the yellow is, for example, you might have said, hey, let's go flat, but then you can't divide 15 by 4, right? So there's a little bit like, hey, I just kind of threw in some numbers to add up to the agreed upon number. And then the red ones, we'll go into that further detail when we get to youth. But basically, I just noted that while you proposed a flat goal, youth is particularly vulnerable to the seasonality. So I had some feedback on that. So this looks like how the allocations change across the state. And so we looked at the change in the last 3 years because that's where the baseline was on the programmatic side. And then this looks like this is where you're at for Southern Middle. So basically, to summarize this, over the past 3 years, the state has lost 6.1% of its Title I and adult investigative worker funding. And as Southern Middle has lost $155,000 or 10% in the last 3 years, we have proportionally revised down our initial ask of 251 by that 10%, or at 235. So does 235 sound somewhat reasonable? It's basically it's 2 more per quarter than what you were.
I'm trying to, we met this target. I'm looking at it again, because the thing that worries me a little.
Mm-hmm. I think you just made it.
I'm sorry. Okay, I think, see, last year we did not negotiate down for the decrease in funding. Okay, so, and I know some of the areas did. So I feel like, doing this 3-year thing, I don't know, I almost feel like it should be what it was from last year to this year. And I was thinking we dropped more than 10%. So that's where we were coming up with the 235.
So if you're comparing Southern Middle from 1.4 to 1.43 to 1.4, then that's gonna be less of a dip than what we just compared about 1.55 to 1.3. So that's what we're looking at. It's the PY21-22 allocation versus the PY23.
3, okay.
And that's how we got that 10% spread there. And the reason that we didn't want to go lower than 235 was back to this kind of statewide goal here, or sorry, here. And I know that this is flat, but so it is a growth goal. And so I didn't say this initially, and apologize, but just pulling back 3 years ago, because of, or I guess even 4 years ago, we had a 8% growth goal. And then because of COVID the following year, we said, we're not gonna have a good year. We thought it would be ambitious to go at 80% of the baseline rather than a growth goal. And then last year, we were like, COVID's still happening, but less so. So how about we do like kind of meeting in the middle and do 90% of the baseline? And then this year, the viewpoint of leadership is we're quote unquote back to normal. And so that's why they're looking at a growth goal again this year by 5% is the kind of minimum that we could get to. So.
Well, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was really tough to get it this year because we spent so much NDWG funding, and so a lot of our dislocated workers went into that program.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and I don't know if it's gonna come into fruition, but this is kind of what we're worried about a little bit this year also. It was tough, just to put that many through and meet these targets and everything. So
just on the NDWG point is that should you have funding for NDWG, if you co-enroll them within either adult or dislocated worker, they would be.
Which I think that they did co-enroll some of them, but it's just been, I don't know, it was just a little tough this time. It's a lot, but we're thankful to have the NDWG money, so I'm definitely not complaining about that. So
if we were to get NDWG money, can we go back and alter these numbers?
I think are you saying if you got additional funds could you go lower?
Because there's the so here's what's cooking. There's the possibility the state is going to ask the federal government for $5 million in national dislocated worker money.
Mhm.
They have asked, and Barbara, correct me if I get off the wrong path. They have asked Southern Middle, how much could you spend? And we have said $3 million.
Mhm.
That's a big chunk of change too,
Right.
If we put a lot of and I say this hypothetically,
Right.
that takes a lot of effort on the NDWG, which takes it's ultimately going to take away from adult dislocated worker if you didn't have it. Could we come back and say, okay, we're putting this many in NDWG, we know we're not going to hit these, dislocated worker adult numbers. Is there any leeway that we could renegotiate some targets if the state were to get the $5 million that they're potentially going to ask for?
Matt, do you want to jump in on that one?
I can't answer whether they can renegotiate the numbers or not, but that has been submitted. The grant has been submitted.
Okay.
I don't know if we won't know for a while if it's going to be approved or not, but it has been submitted.
Okay, that's good to know.
This is my interpretation, and if you would like to, we can have bigger wigs in this conversation. But my inkling is that if you all would not be able to serve, we're proposing here something like 58, 59, 59, 59, and you needed to kind of move some of that staffing power to do NDWG, then perhaps I would think that the core program of Title I would trump trying into these kind of tangential things like it. But that is a me speaking. I don't think.
Well, and I'll add, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I will add that the NDWG is a 3-year grant, so it's not like you would have time. You wouldn't have the rush necessarily to fulfill the terms of that grant if we were to get it that we did with the COVID grant, because it's a longer term thing. I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but
I think
So
we
we-
spent, Barbara, was it almost $1 million in the time frame they gave us?
Well, this last one was 644,000. The first one I think was 1.2 or something, but the 644, we didn't get it till I think around
October.
October. So I mean, and to be honest, that helped us a little bit because we were able to put into our regular dislocated worker, people, and we do try to co-enroll also. The 3 years does help, but we're hoping to spend $1 million a year, but I mean, we can try this. We can try this 235. We're really worried about the formula funds keep going down. I don't really know how people afford to take the 20% and do IWT, honestly, because ours seems to be getting pretty low. So, but
Right.
I mean,
that helps define the haves and the have-nots, right?
Mhm.
So perhaps another way to think about this is, should we get this maybe grant, right? Then we could probably factor that into the next set of KPIs as we have 3 years to fulfill that obligation. Is that something that would be beneficial, you would think, Matt?
Did you say that one more time? I'm sorry, Ben.
So we're kind of playing this hypothetical through, right? So say Southern Middle gets the $3 million that they're asking for NDWG, but they have 3 years to do this. Could it be that next year, when we know that they would have those additional obligations, that we would factor that into setting the adult dislocated worker KPIs for PY24?
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially because like the earliest we're going to know that we're even going to get this grant is like October. So that's already like a big chunk of the year. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good way to do it from our end.
So could we give that promise to you all, Serena, Barbara? Is that helpful?
Yes, that is helpful. Because I do know that, the last time we were a little later getting it, and I realize that they're not gonna know on this one or even know if we're gonna even get that much or any at this point, so, I just want to have enough funding in the formula funds to be able to meet all this, but, so I mean, I'm saying we can try it at 235.
I agree.
Because even if we get the grant, even if we get the NDWG, it's still going to take a while to get the contracts written to figure out what the actual money's going to be per area. So it's not going to be like
January. It may be January or February.
It could. Yeah. I hope not, but it could be.
We know how this goes, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. So it's certainly not something that's going to come in a hurry.
Right.
And has there been any discussion to maybe for these KPIs to break apart the adult and the dislocated worker?
And I'd be open to that. I'll just tell you why we combine them. The initial reason that we combine them is to, again, allow some discretion for you all. Because we know that like when the economy is good, we probably have more adults than dislocated workers. And then if the economy tanks again, which some economists are saying might happen this year, right? Is then we would probably see movement of funds that were dedicated to Title I adult to dislocated worker, right? Because that's where the emphasis would be. And so that's kind of why we have the kind of together.
Okay. I was just wondering. That was just a personal. Me and Barbara had kind of brought it up of maybe why.
No, yeah, and
why are they
it's
grouped
also
together?
been confusing. It like seems like every other year we're like, no, it includes incumbent worker. Now it doesn't. Now it includes NDWG. It doesn't. Kind of thing. So, sorry for playing the hide and seek.
No, that's
here.
okay.
The other thing, just before we move on this one was, and I believe we talked about this every year, but do we know what was successful in 2017, 2018? Noting that we, in one quarter, was able to hit 237 back in the day.
2017 was before Barbara came, so I'm trying to remember. I want to say we were very successful with dislocated workers, because that was kind of the start. 2017 was the start of when Goodman started laying people off, and General Motors went through some line production changes at that time, and so it took them, I think, up to a year to 2 years because it seems like every 2 to 4 years GM changes over some lines, so they shut down for about a year. And I want to say in 2017 that was the start of one of theirs.
And that does ring a bell. Sorry for not always.
Because I'm thinking, Barbara, you came 18, right? Or not 19?
20.
20. Okay. I'm dating her even longer. I'm putting her here before she even here.
October of 20, but it seems like it's been 10 years, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if that, we would hate that relationship to occur again, right? Because that means people are being laid off. But make sure that you keep those connections with people.
And that was a time frame we did transfer a lot of the adult money over to dislocated worker to use.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because that was the first time we had ever been allowed to do that. And I remember Southern Middle took advantage of that for the dislocated worker side.
So we're good with this 235, right? That's what we said.
Right.
Well, we are reluctantly accepting this.
Right.
We talked about incumbent worker already, but this is just, hey, these are the big swings that we're talking about, which is kind of why we pulled it off as a KPI. And then this is already talked about another middle strategy of dealing with this. This is going back to that Southeast comment that I was talking about is we want to make sure that we're giving opportunity to serve through to hit these KPIs that we just talked about for adult dislocated worker. And there's kind of two ways that we're talking about addressing that. One is kind of a rethinking about what it means to be a wheel participant. I know that when I have my kind of elevator conversation with someone, they're like, what do you do? I'm like, I help run the data for a convoluted scholarship program, right? And so I think that kind of notion is changing in terms of how we're defining what it means to be a participant. And so I talked with Matt and Troy last week actually about this and talking about perhaps we need to put some training together about what it means to be a participant. And I think that we've already kind of informally done this, but recognizing that there's kind of maybe something like service-based participant, and I just put an acronym on it because it's tend to stick. Something like SBP, or hey, you can still have enrollments even if your funding is low or like tight in the moment, right? You can still meet the needs of participants without necessarily spending something like supportive services or training. Like there's many other things that can do that can trigger participation that can still align with the goals of the participants. And then the second thing is, well, I guess I should pause there. Does that make sense? In terms of kind of expanding our idea about what we traditionally have thought of participant to be.
It sort of makes sense, I guess. I'm trying to grasp it.
So, Matt, can you help me out on this one?
Well, we're just kind of working on talking about some ways to, serve participants as funding gets lower. We've got to just be a little bit more talking about, what else we can do to help participants besides just spending money on them, or better ways to spend money. And another area has actually requested this, but we thought there could be some good, useful lessons to take away from that by kind of hearing from each area and kind of learning what everybody's doing. So it's a work in progress, but it's something that we think is worth pursuing because we don't have any control over the budget's getting lower from the federal level. So what can we do to try to, still help people with maybe a little bit less money? So that's kind of the thinking.
So being intentional with money.
Basically, yeah, doing more with less. That great catchphrase.
Right, but like I think going beyond that phrase, right, about saying like this is specifically how you could do more. Right?
Yeah.
These are the specific menu of services that don't quote unquote cost money because they're already included in having staff to meet the needs of participants. And the other thing that I'll point out here is not only does it help in terms of KPIs, like hitting how many folks we want to serve for the request of leadership, but it would also help the hardest to serve, and here's why. So if we are currently spending X amount of dollars on direct participant costs like tuition and supportive services, but we're spreading ourselves thin because we're serving a whole lot of people with less money, then if we kind of reframe this to kind of have two different kind of categories of enrollments, then we could move some of the money that we would have spent on a segment of the participants that might not need direct supportive services to this other group, and that we might be able to perhaps increase ITA caps or supportive services for that more targeted group, if that makes sense. So hopefully that might even increase how many training or what kind of training opportunities we might be able to provide, what kind of supportive services. So I think there's some real opportunity in that approach. And then the second thing is we really want to be proactive with our grants and budgets team to kind of review, have KPIs as kind of a canary in the coal mine where I think Greater Memphis is a great example here where they did something like 130% of their adult listening worker goal after just the first 3 quarters. And then following that, their enrollments tanked because they were so quote unquote out of it, right? So we're already kind of trying to address that with a service delivery thing in point number 1. And then point number 2 is, should we have discretionary funds available? Big asterisk there, right? It'd be great to kind of reobligate those funds to those core programs so that they can continue to serve at the high rate. This point number 2 makes sense. And Brian, did I garble it this time? Was I okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So you're saying Are
Yeah.
you saying, Brian, Ben, if,
Yeah.
so like with that, are you
Mhm.
saying mid, like after a couple of quarters,
Mhm.
or at what point are you saying, to redirect the funds to high performing LWDBs? I mean, is that like something after a quarter, 2 quarters, you see something? Somebody,
Sorry, Katrina. Just need to clarify all funding subject to funds availability. There's a lot of encumbrances going on in terms of many ECD projects, particularly Blue Oval City. So, and each LWTA has to demonstrate per our additional funding policy the need for additional funds, in that they cannot continue to operate and provide participants with the necessary, services. They have to demonstrate that by displaying, full obligations and encumbrances for other activities. So again, just to circle back, everything is going to be subject to funds availability. Which is one of the main reasons why we encouraged and we appreciate Southern Middle submitting an application as part of the Quest NDWG.
okay, great. All right,
But-
thank you.
Right, and just, this is just, should we have funds available? Definitely emphasis that point. Then hopefully KPI completion before the year end would be a good indicator that you all are meeting the state requirements. And it could be helpful in submitting an application for additional funding. All that's wonderful, right? And that has been said in the KPI policy since the beginning. But I just wanted to make that point.
Right, okay, thank you.
So I'm probably gonna fly through most of these, because I just know that we're an hour into our time slot here. But for apprenticeships, I know this is indirect, but please, work with the apprenticeship team, to help them grow. So if you have employers that you're meeting with that apprenticeships makes, sense, please, let them know. So for Southern Middle, that would be, Greg. Let them know if a state certified apprenticeship program might make sense for that program, or sorry, for that business. They're trying to grow how many state apprenticeship programs they have, and they're peaking. For JVSG, this is how well we're doing across the state. So we saw a huge spike last quarter. And then for Southern Middle, this is kind of where you're at. And then I went ahead and I put in the numbers that we had agreed to over email. And so notice that there is a bit of a reach there, based on what you all have done previously. I see that Jeff is not on this call here, so I'll just speak to what he said. Other calls, JVSG has gone through kind of a pretty big change. They recognize that a lot of their staff turnover was due to they were finding participants jobs that were making more money than they were, right? Which of course would lead to high staff turnover. So what they've done is they've kind of consolidated a lot of positions to help staff make a little bit closer to market rate. And so hopefully that will help with our staff retention. And I know that he's looking at some pretty creative ways to kind of work with Southern Middle specifically about having folks possibly dip down for Northern Middle. Have you been in those conversations, Celine or Barbara? How we're gonna make sure that we are serving all counties in Southern Middle with these smaller amounts of staff for JVC?
Not that I've heard anything. I've heard, I've heard most are trying to transition to the 50-50 model,
Mhm.
which we've had 50. We were one of the first ones to have a 50-50 out of the 6 that started. But I've not heard, any specific information.
And I'm not sure if it's like at the stage where like it's being shared openly or not, but I've been in conversations where it's like, okay, where would make sense for this person to serve this, right? And so I think it's going to require some kind of regional collaboration,
Right.
to make sure that all counties have JVSD offered. And so,
As I say, and now ours have already, because we've got 13 counties, we've always divvied them up and kind of had that. This one takes these counties and we'll cover this one. So I'm sure it'll be probably along the same lines because we've not had Murray County is our only one that has like a full-time DVOP and a full-time leaver. So we've
Right.
always been in the mix of sharing and covering all the counties.
And this is definitely another point to bring home that we don't have really, what is it, lever centric KPIs, right? This is more participant focused rather than business focused. And so that's one there. And just so you know how these targets were developed was we looked at how many FTEs we had. So if you notice that your goal is much lower than it was last year, rather than 7,877 kind of thing, to 3,444. With that being said, we definitely want to make sure that please make sure that Jeff and his team communicate how their service delivery model is going to work, and also figuring out who's going to get credit where, right? I've seen sometimes that if a staff serves someone across the line, then they'll get credit, right? We don't want to give Northern Middle credit for other meals. That's just something to keep in mind.
Has there been any discussion, and this just comes from my experience managing labor and veteran staff. Has there been anything about DBOPs like in the number on their caseloads versus the number that they exit? Because the new, like the JVSG new enrollment, any career advance, like anyone can register. So they're not necessarily coming from vet staff per se, but DBOPs, should be carrying a caseload, depending on their area size. Well, like I remember when I was in the office, I had a hard time, like they wouldn't put people on their caseload because when it's kind of like how career advisors have to follow up ever so often. But I saw that there was not a lot of, there was really no push for them to, besides their supervisor saying, hey, what's your case? Why am I not seeing any caseloads coming out of your office?
Right.
So that may be a point of discussion you want to talk about around a KPI is, having a minimum number of caseloads.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think this year the emphasis is switching to, I think previous years we did potential to serve. In terms of splitting it out by LWPA, this year we did FTEs, which I think are increasingly important because of this big transition, right? About staffing. And I think that if we get back to our kind of pre-COVID carrying capacity, I do think that would make sense about having what is your case, right? Rather than new enrollments. I think that we just want to get to that level, and how you get that level to have one.
And that brings up the whole other issue of retaining those caseworkers, retaining the JVSG staff long enough to have a caseload.
Right. And then caseloads being transferred about like, oh, this person talked to 5 staff ago. Whether we need to have the life story. Good point there about switching to total enrollment eventually on JVSG. Just making that there. Cool. So justice involved. This is another one where our enrollments have been spiking. And again, I think this is kind of primarily due to like capturing the people that we're already serving. See if I have a slide. I don't think I have a slide specifically for Southern Middle, but just as a point of emphasis that we are continuing to include justice involved no matter where they come from, right? So including age will count towards those numbers. Moving on to RISA. With RISA, two points I just want to make. First is that the KPI actually finally aligns with our guidance that we've had for years now, which is 50% of those who show up for orientation need to be referred, and then 25% of those who were referred need to be co-enrolled, or put more directly, 12.5% of those who show up for RISA orientation need to be co-enrolled within Title I dislocated worker. I believe the main kind of point that Gail wanted to make was, please make sure that your staff who are doing RISA are scheduling their slots such that they can do that program, right? So if you give someone only 20 minutes, they can really just give you the RISA spiel. They won't be able to do a phone. Is one point. And then the second point is just to be aware is they're doing a federally mandated kind of outcome experiment test to see how effective RESA is right in this coming year. And so basically what will happen is some folks who would have qualified to be in RESA will actually not be selected, and that's going to be a control group. And they're going to compare the outcomes of that group to folks who go through the RESA program. And so how does that affect KPIs is some folks that would be going into your orientation are not going to be. And so there'll be a little bit less folks eligible to be enrolled than it would be otherwise. And that's just kind of yet another factor of how volatile RESA can be, right? Because on the flip side, if the economy becomes rough again, you might have 10 times the number. So this is a little bit kind of hard to nail down exactly what's the best goal there as it relates to RESA. So the current goals were developed based on historical opportunity. RESA. Oh, I do have a slide here. I actually put you down as a best practice because you have been growing kind of quarter over quarter.
Yay for Southern Middle. We're doing something good. We're doing something good.
Yeah, y'all doing great. Do you have anything to share about how you've been able to pull this off? Or because I know I think Upper Cumberland was like, how did they figure it out?
I had a conversation with Jane this morning. I saw her, Barbara, at the chamber event, and I asked her about the referrals, and she said the referrals have increased.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And because I was asking her about SNAP, I was concerned about SNAP and RESA because SNAP continue, I kind of see it dwindling a little more, but she said the RESA referrals had kind of had an uptick. So that's the only thing I know right now that might have contributed. And I think we've done better at possibly just documenting what we're doing. Because I know our OSO has been really, talking to everybody about documentation and getting it in BOSS.
Right.
Yes.
And I think in previous years we were like, we need to increase the communication between people we're referring to. And then sometimes it's like you're referring to yourself, right? Like your staff, RESA staff might be the same as your Title I staff too. But just wherever we can from a leadership perspective. Hey, the expectation is that someone is going well with it.
Well, and I think Barbara and I, our area, our one-stop operator that we've got now, she came from the Northern Middle area. She's so smart. Like she still teaches Barbara and I things that, we didn't even think about or, from that side of the house, but she worked on that side for Title I. She was a Title I director. So she knows how important documentation is. Right. And so I really think her drilling down and taking the time in those quarterly partner meetings to do the training on why it's important, to document and what we put in BOSS and be intentional about the referrals.
Yes, and I know she spent a lot of time in the AJC that we have the RESA and work with our CA that handles RESA. So that is something that, she focuses in areas that she thinks that we need help in and is exactly what we want. So we are starting to see results in different areas. Don't you think, Selena?
I think so, because that's not mine or Barbara's expertise is on, I know I can retain a little bit of what I did in the AJCs, but, it's changed so much. But I think having her come from a big urban metro area down to us, we're very different, but she brings the expertise that we needed, that we just haven't ran into, or scenarios that she's already had experience in. So she's really been intentional about training all parties on what to do.
That's great. And also, as a reminder, this is recorded. And if you would please share this video of your compliments to, because this is definitely a best practice.
We can, because she's great. And she's been really good about at our local board meetings. She presents these KPIs each quarter.
Oh, great.
And where we're at. And now she'll tell you we didn't meet it. Here's why we think we're not. And if she sees that, she has done a really good job of getting, with Title III, the whatever partner needs to be at the table and doing a deeper dive and looking why we're not meeting that.
I think it actually reminds me of one comment that I failed to make earlier is as it relates to the incumbent workers, right? That's going to be probably a local KPI for Northern Middle and maybe some other areas. Equally so, if you all have KPIs that you've locally developed that maybe your local board requested that you're sharing with them, if you would like to, and this is not a requirement at all, but if you would like to give that to us at Wired, we would be happy to pass that along to the state board, because I think that can also provide needed context, right? About like, hey, maybe we weren't going so hard on this maybe state proposed goal because we were really having emphasis on people. So I think that just provides further context on what's going on. So if your OSO is providing like perhaps an additional dashboard or report or whatever, we'd be happy to pass that on.
She does a dashboard, and we don't have any extra KPIs. I know Upper Cumberland does. They put some business service KPIs on the staff there, but we don't have any extra at this time like that.
We don't, but she does keep a year round where we're at. So we know if we need to work in certain areas on KPIs. I know she's done that a lot. And even like after data validation and things, if she sees things in those areas, she's really been good to try to keep us on track in areas that we need it. So we're blessed to have her.
Just to throw in CSEP, and I know that you don't do direct providers there, but just if people come in that need CSEP that are being redirected, their goal this year is new enrollments because the amount of vacancies have been going up and up. And so basically, just so you all are in the loop, each agency will be tasked of having 1/3 of their slots as minimum. And then there's some contact information that we'll also share with the slides and the video as well. For SNAP ENT, we are back to new enrollment because we're back on the possibility of enrolling more folks to get more money is back on the menu. So that's what we're going to measure this year. And then for trade, still looking at 90% full enrollment as the goal there. Thank you all on your work on this. I know it can be somewhat cumbersome. And to your credit to your work, Tennessee is considered to be actually an national best practice as it relates to trade, and we will soon be having competition with that. That will be leading a training for us. Even though we're not actually hitting that, we're actually doing better than our surroundings. And then for Wagner Pizer, I kind of said this at the beginning, but we have reversed that trend. And again, great job, Southern Middle. It sounds like probably this is echoing everything you said about your OSO, about being intentional and enrolling folks in Wagner Pizer when they come into the ADC.
You cut out. Were you asking us a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Another best practice for Wagner Pizer.
Yeah.
And then 2, would you say this best practice is an echoing of what you were saying earlier about your OSO and being intentional about enrolling folks?
I think so.
I agree.
I think Georgina mirrors that message when she has, direct staff meetings down with her team leads. I think it fully is about being intentional.
And then 2 more that we want to go in a little bit deeper on is youth new enrollment and then in-school youth. So on youth new enrollment, this kind of looks like at the state level. And then this is what it looks like for Southern Middle. Again, would love to have another statewide funds to get those huge enrollments that we had in the past. Hopefully that's what you see, maybe somewhat beneficial in that. And so back to this kind of cheat sheet of sorts, you all were asking for 111. We were initially asking for 129. We said basically the short version of this is where we would request to meet in the middle. This is what your allocations look like. changing over time from 850 down to 670, which is a 21% drop, which is very significant for $180,000. And so that what we would like to do is lower the ask from 129 to 120.
And we also have another, this is where the concern of like the 282 comes into play for the new youth work
Right.
experience enrollment, kind of how the dislocated worker with that grant. We kind of, Barbara and I talked about this on Monday. We would like to request that maybe we meet in the middle and do 115.
Troy, what do you feel about 115 given that we're dropping by 21%?
I hit the wrong button. Sorry about that.
Very
At 115, we were asking 120, right?
So we initially asked 129, they initially asked 111. Our second ask is 120. Now you're saying, what was that, 115?
I'd be good with that.
Yeah, okay, so 115, block that one in, and then just, the next question is how do you want to break that out? And so, just throwing this out there is, and this is your, last year, how it was divided, which was very even. 3-year average was a little bit more lopsided in quarters, and then a 5-year average. And so basically, this is looking at the, I'm sorry, I believe it's 122 number, but would you be in favor of dividing that 115 kind of more historically proportional, or you just want to keep it flat?
If we could do the first 3 quarters, 20,
Mhm.
I think it's 29, and then the last quarter 4 at 28. If Barbara agrees to that.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I think that's what we had looked at.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
I won't bore you with the napkin math, but I assume that adds up.
It does. I've just checked it 3 times.
Okay, great. And then for in-school youth, basically the purpose of the in-school youth KPI is just to maintain this waiver, right? We want to allow you to have the autonomy to pick and choose. And so we were asking that 30% of what we just agreed to of that 115 to whatever 30% of 115 would be your in-school youth goal. Troy, are you okay going with a little bit lower than we had talked about?
Yeah, just as long as the 30% of 115 is fine.
So 30% would be 34.5.
Mhm.
So could we round up and do 35?
Sounds good. Does that sound good to you, Troy?
Yeah, that's great.
And then you want to break it out into quarters?
You know it, man.
Kind of similar thing, whatever flat is, if there is.
So we'll do 9 for quarter 1 through 3, and then
Mhm.
8 on quarter 4.
All right.
If Barbara agrees, I'm
Yeah.
putting it in our spread. You know, Ben, we keep a
Yeah.
separate spreadsheet of our negotiations that we
Right.
keep just for ourselves. You know that after these years.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing. Exactly. Okay, so this is in school youth. Basically, we just kind of talked about it. There. And then for summer youth work experience, Troy, I knew you had some comments about the difference between phase 1 and phase 2. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, so of course, phase 1 was our governor's discretionary fund, and you had to be a member of WIOA. Phase 2, the only requirement is the age, 14 to 24. And I kind of want to give the purpose behind this from the governor's point of view, from our commissioner's point of view. The push was if a youth comes in the door, we want to be able to get them a part-time job with no barriers, no red tape. If they're between the ages, we want to be able to get them a part-time job. And they're really thinking, if youth are working during these time periods, there may not be in as much trouble hanging with the wrong people, getting work experience into what they like and maybe pursuing that later on, and as well as our employers getting maybe future employees from all this. So I really want to push that, that this is the biggest open door policy for youth we've ever had. If a youth comes into an AJC, that's what they want to do. Spoke with DOL today. They called and found the website and everything, and they're just like singing Tennessee's praises about this, being able to help as many as we can. So I just wanted to throw that out there about phase 1 and phase 2, that how this is a first time ever, and hopefully we can work out our kinks, because it's first time for y'all, first time for us. We would learn through it, but where we can help any youth that comes in our door. So.
And so basically, just to expand on that, thank you, Troy, is we've had other calls this week where I think it was like Greater Memphis wanted to co-enroll everybody within the summer youth work experience program, which is allowable, though the intention is to kind of open it up to everybody. So should you find yourself where, you know, it's hard to hit these KPIs that we kind of have negotiated, then just make sure that you're opening up to everyone. One. And then two is I have a couple of data notes here, given that this is a new KPI. First is enrollment trumps funding source. So even though I have SYEP over here and big and flashy, youth work experience is going to count as a KPI at least, regardless of funding stream. So we talked about earlier that likely Southern Middle is not in a position to kind of move Title I funds into other places, but should you do that for youth work experience, then that would count towards that KPI. And then secondly, for as it relates to co-enrollment, if you find yourself participants co-enrolling in both Title I and SYEP, then they would count towards both of those KPIs. Any questions on SYEP before we move on?
I don't think so. I think we're just now getting really going good on phase 2. So we've had a lot of training and building packets and things. So we feel like we're just now getting started rolling good on phase 2. So we hope that all's going to go well there.
We've been intentional with the pre-planning before we rolled this
Right.
out.
Yes, we have.
But now I did talk to Roberta and Regina this morning, and we had the first 14-year-old placed for our area. So
is that something
awesome.
policy wise you had to overcome on the? I know there was some.
Say that again, Ben.
I know that some areas had difficulty with that. So
we just wanted to make sure we rolled out a complete product with a packet and had all of the documentation that was needed on the front end. And so Barbara's team, the OSO, has done a really great job. Southern Middle has been successful with the summer youth in the past for several summers. It's a little different strings attached this time. So we didn't want to roll out something incomplete and, you know, overpromise and underdeliver. So Barbara's team, they've done a really good job of getting a packet together. So we're good from the beginning.
And I'm not going to lie, child labor laws was first and forefront
because they can be scary for sure.
We were nervous about that one. So we wanted to make sure everything was covered on child labor laws and it was in the packet. So
we're a little cautious, but we would rather get it right from the front than have to go back and fix things later on.
And hopefully this is something that we'll fix it this year and we'll be ready to go. Should we get this future years?
Absolutely. I think it will be great.
Well, with that, give yourself a round of applause. We're done with the KPI negotiations. I do have some kind of bonus material just throw out there. First is some maps.
Can I, before you leave KPIs, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I know you discussed the REIS, I don't know, everybody pronounces it different. So that target, I don't know, Selena, did you ever I couldn't find what we did last year, if we met it, but it looked like from your the graph you showed, it looked like we did, but it's at 29. Is it at 29 this time? So I was.
Yeah, I'll switch over to my actual tables here.
I have two numbers, Ben. I have a 6 for PY22. I've got 16 as a set target and 27 negotiated. there's the thunder at my house. Could you
Okay,
tell
so
us
for-
what we did?
Okay, so for RISA, I have Southern Middle of the last 4 quarters, and I do have it through June at 37 actual. And we have the graph. Okay, yeah, this is the graph. So y'all are killing it. Last quarter you did 10 against a goal of 4.
Okay, so
Could you read those off like quarter 1 if you don't, because I'm making
Yeah.
a note in my spreadsheet just for
Yeah.
reference, so we will have those.
Yeah, 10, 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
And I will throw that in the PowerPoint as well when I send it.
okay.
And looks like the goal, just to confirm, was target was a total of 16. So you drastically.
The goal- Our goal was 16, is that what you said?
Mhm, and you actually did 37, so you more than double.
Okay.
Okay, oh, good, good,
Perfect.
good. Yeah,
And then switching over to the goodies, and then I'll let y'all go. And okay. Switching over to these. Fund maps. This is Madison's map, of course, on where the AJCs are. Please let us know if anything needs to change. Email Madison. Then we had, that's a fun graphic. The AE, their new service providers are right here, as well as the potential to serve. And then IELCE, their new providers there. This is the distressed county latest map here, as well as the changes. So for example, Moore County improved, while Dayton County declined. And then the previous year for reference for FY23. This is the CSEP map. Local contacts, again, let us know if anything needs to change there. And then I owe you all state contacts, and then this is the C7 contacts. And then finally, what is next? We also owe you a wrap-up report for PY 2022, including that great work that you all did on RISA, and then we have a state board meeting coming up on Friday, August 25th. And then we would love this year, as another thing to do, is give you all more timely data via dashboard. And we know we've said this for multiple years, but we're truly trying so that you all don't have to pull all these reports, which we do. Thank you all again. I know we were 2 minutes over time, but I appreciate your help in terms of achieving these goals.
Well, that was-
middle.
I was gonna say, that was my fault. I'm sorry I was late, and I appreciate y'all waiting on me.
No, thank you all for bearing through this weather.
And thank you for the reports you give us, like each quarter, because those are nice to have when we go back to do these next year. We can
Okay.
look back and see what we did.
That's great.
Absolutely.
And I tried to keep it like on that working document all the way back
Yes,
as far as
we love
possible.
that.
Yeah, so.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And I don't know if y'all been in the loop or not, but Georgina has been doing some AJC site lead trainings. And so
Yes.
if you or your staff would benefit from them, please make sure that you reach out to your team on this. And so one of the things that we will be doing on that is how you actually run the people.
Perfect. Because I know I've promised Georgina, after we've negotiated today, my
Mhm.
spreadsheet that we use, me and Barbara, just for us,
Yeah.
we're giving it to them so they can pass it on, and she's going to do some KPI training with her team leads on it. So they'll
That's
have the
great.
targets that they can keep at their desk too.
That's fantastic. So increased awareness means increasing opportunity.
So Ben,
Well,
are these like effective as, I mean, I know they go back to July 1, but
Mhm.
like when are these really official, I guess, these KPIs?
Well,
What's the next process?
So, so the final call will be Friday afternoon, so I doubt I'll be able to send an email out that Friday, but I will send it probably Monday. I'll say close of business. I will send you a pretty version of all these things, but,
Okay.
your notes should be accurate. The only thing that might squiggle a little bit is the quarterly breakdown.
Okay,
I just will confirm that they add up to them.
okay.
Okay,
Alright,
well then
that's-
I'm gonna wait until I hear from you before I send this to Georgina,
Sure.
just so I can have all the i's dotted and t's crossed before we
Right.
put it out.
And so I have my cheat sheet about what the state is asking, but obviously these calls might change those. So,
It's okay.
rather than do many iterations. I'll just do one.
I think this was probably the most and Barbara may disagree. This one was easier, I think, than the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Right, and
We kind of felt good about the targets this time.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. So was front loading it helpful about the state saying
Yes,
by LWDA rather than have to negotiate within your region?
yes. I'd rather you
Yes.
just tell
Yeah.
it. To us, it was because it's
Mhm.
just an extra layer. When you have to get all 3 EDs on the same,
Right,
it's extra time. So it was easier for you to front load and then
Mhm.
let us just work on our own, because we'll discuss it, as long as every local area is in agreement with what the state put out, then we should be good.
right. And then I think it's good to front load this so that this call, while long, we can have more discussion. I think it was beneficial. And then I kind of I would love there to be that interregional conversation, perhaps that can be moved into the, right, about like, how can we work together rather than.
Yeah, I think it's more time consuming to do the interregional conversation,
Right.
only, and that's for Middle Tennessee. I will say
Right,
that
yeah,
because
yeah.
Barbara, Marla, and Becky are pretty much, on this, all 3 of them are on the same page and will do whatever's needed for the region. Whereas I know other grand planning regions don't have the relationship that those 3 ladies have. So for me
There's
as
a-
the
there's
lead
a
regional, it
wide-
makes it easier.
There's a wide range of regional. For sure.
So for us, I think it was easier. It went a lot smoother. We could jump right into mine and Barbara's conversations with Georgina.
Mhm.
Are you good with this? So
Yeah, and
we
I think
like
it's
it like
also
this.
helpful for us, so I can make sure that, like, for example, Troy was on this call because he had. Right, so we didn't have to schedule another call.
Yeah.
That's all for
Yep,
everybody.
that
We,
was great.
we like it like this.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
We'll try to run it back.
Okay,
There we go.
Thank you.
bye.
Thanks, everybody.